The sun had barely risen over the steel horizon of the naval base when the recruits assembled on the training field, their boots thudding in uneven rhythm as they scrambled into formation. Among the rows of rigid bodies and hardened faces stood a figure who seemed almost out of place. Her name was Claire Donovan, and though her eyes were sharp with determination, her body lagged behind in every measure of strength. Sweat was already rolling down her temples before the drills had even begun, and the other recruits exchanged sidelong glances, whispers of doubt carried on the cool morning air. She had failed every combat drill so far, and today would be no different, at least that was what everyone believed. The instructors barked commands and the unit dropped for push-ups, each motion snapping like clockwork across the lines. Claire faltered on the 15th repetition, her arms trembling, chest pressing halfway before giving out completely. A muffled laugh rippled from somewhere behind her, quickly silenced by the drill instructor's glare. She bit her lip, shame boiling beneath her skin, but forced herself to rise again. The rules were brutal. No excuses, no sympathy, only results. By the time the unit moved to the obstacle course, Claire's lungs were burning, her shoulders screaming, but she pressed on, willing herself not to collapse. She tried to climb the rope wall, fingers slipping, legs kicking at empty air as the others surged ahead. One by one they vaulted over the barrier and sprinted to the next station, while Claire remained dangling halfway, a picture of exhaustion and frustration. Her mind screamed at her to let go, to fall, to accept what she had always feared, that she wasn't cut out for this world. But she refused. With teeth clenched, she hauled herself higher, though it took her 3 times as long as the others. When she finally straddled the top of the wall and dropped down the other side, the course was already finished. The recruits stood in formation, breathing hard, sweat glistening on their forearms, while Claire stumbled into line, shoulders hunched with humiliation. The instructors marked her failure on their tablets, their eyes cold, clinical, already writing her off. She wasn't the first to fall short and she wouldn't be the last. Yet what stung most was not their judgment but the unspoken certainty shared by every pair of eyes on her. She didn't belong here and she never would. Later that morning, during live combat simulation drills, the disparity only widened. While others moved like a fluid machine, executing cover fire and coordinated advances, Claire's steps were hesitant. Her aim wavered, shots scattering wide, her body stiff and reactive instead of instinctive. Again and again she was marked killed by the sensors strapped to her vest. At one point she was pinned against a barricade, her weapon useless, until the whistle signaled the end of the exercise. The squad regrouped, adrenaline still humming in their veins, but she stood apart, her failure glaring like a spotlight. The humiliation grew heavier with each exercise. By midday she could feel resentment from her peers, not because she was weak but because her weakness dragged them down. In a unit where precision and survival depended on trust, one faltering piece could cost lives. That knowledge gnawed at her more deeply than any physical pain. In the mess hall, she ate in silence, hearing the low rumble of conversation around her, catching fragments of laughter, of frustration, of whispered mockery. Some pitied her, most didn't. Claire stared at her tray of food, untouched, stomach twisting with the weight of failure. She wondered why she had even come here, why she had endured months of grueling tests to enter training only to collapse at every hurdle. Yet beneath all that doubt, something stubborn still smoldered, a spark she couldn't extinguish. She remembered her father's words before he died, his hand heavy on her shoulder. Strength isn't always in the body, it's in the will to keep standing when everything tries to knock you down. She repeated that to herself like a prayer, though it was getting harder to believe. That afternoon the captain arrived. The energy on the field shifted instantly as his presence spread through the ranks. Captain Hayes was a Navy SEAL legend, a man whose name carried weight like iron, whose eyes could slice through excuses with surgical precision. He was known for being ruthless, uncompromising, but also fiercely protective of those who showed even a spark of potential. The recruits stiffened as he strode across the training grounds, his uniform immaculate, his gaze sweeping across the lines like a hawk searching for weakness. When his eyes fell on Claire, it was as though the air froze. He had heard of her failures, seen the reports stacking against her. To many she was already a lost cause. But Hayes had a different instinct. He did not measure recruits only by their performance, but by something harder to see, whether they broke or whether they bent and rose again. Without a word, he signaled for the combat drill to begin anew. Rifles snapped into hands, boots dug into dirt, adrenaline sparked. Claire's heart pounded as she took her position, knowing that failure here might seal her fate. The whistle shrieked and chaos erupted once more, gunfire simulations echoing, recruits moving with sharp coordination. Claire tried to keep up, but within moments she was lost in the storm, her mind spiraling, her body lagging. Then it happened. She froze behind cover, unable to push forward, fear and shame choking her. Her teammates surged past, the scenario unraveling. The captain's voice cut through the battlefield like a blade, a single order, sharp and simple. Move forward. The captain's command cracked across the field like thunder, slicing through the chaos and embedding itself deep inside Claire's chest. It was not barked with anger, nor spat with contempt, but delivered with such undeniable authority that it stripped away every excuse she had clung to. Her legs, which only seconds before had felt heavy as stone, suddenly surged with life. She didn't think, she didn't argue, she just obeyed. Bursting from behind cover, she sprinted toward the next barricade, rifle clutched in trembling hands. The sensors lit as shots skimmed her, registering near misses, but she kept going, her boots pounding the dirt. The order had been simple. Move forward, and in its simplicity there was clarity. For once, she wasn't drowning in self-doubt or calculating how badly she might fail. She was only moving one step, then another, the captain's voice echoing in her head like an anchor keeping her steady. Her squad noticed. At first, they had rolled their eyes, expecting her to stall, to drag behind as always. But when she surged into the open, reckless but determined, it shifted the dynamic. One recruit, Moreno, instinctively provided cover fire for her, and suddenly she wasn't dead weight anymore. She was part of the machine, imperfect but moving, alive in the fight. Claire dove behind a pile of sandbags, breath ragged, heart thundering, sweat pouring down her temples. Her rifle felt heavier than it ever had, but for the first time she aimed without hesitation. The target popped up 50 meters ahead and she squeezed the trigger. The round cracked, the sensor lit and the target fell. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even clean, but it was hers. That single hit rang louder in her ears than the cacophony of simulated gunfire all around. She moved again. The captain's eyes tracked her from across the field, expression unreadable, but she could feel his presence pressing against her like a force. Every time her body screamed to stop, she remembered his single command and forced herself forward. A wall loomed ahead, another obstacle she had always dreaded. Her arms shook as she jumped, fingers scrabbling for purchase, but she refused to give in to the shame that had haunted her before. She scrambled, pulled, kicked, slipped halfway and almost lost it entirely. The jeers of the past rang in her ears. But then, faintly, across the simulated battlefield, she heard the captain's voice again, "Don't stop." It wasn't a roar this time, but a steady demand, unwavering. And she obeyed. With a guttural cry, she dragged herself up, clawed over the edge and rolled down the other side, lungs burning, arms raw. She landed awkwardly, but she was still moving. By the time the whistle blew, signaling the end of the drill, Claire collapsed onto her knees, every muscle trembling, her vision swimming with exhaustion. She had been marked hit multiple times, her kill ratio was low, and her movements were sloppy compared to the others, but she hadn't quit. That single difference glowed inside her chest like a coal sparking to flame. Around her, the squad gathered, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others quietly nodding. Moreno offered her a hand, and though his eyes still held doubt, there was something else there now, a flicker of respect. She took the hand, pulling herself up with trembling arms, her chest heaving. For the first time she didn't feel like a ghost in the unit. She felt present. The captain approached. Silence fell over the recruits as his boots struck the dirt, slow and deliberate. He stopped in front of Claire, his gaze cutting into her, seeing everything, the failures, the weakness but also the spark. She wanted to shrink beneath that stare, but something inside her refused to bow. Her chin lifted slightly, though her body screamed in protest. Captain Hayes spoke quietly, but the words carried to every ear. "That's the first time I've seen you fight. No lecture. No scorn. Just the bare truth, carved sharp enough to pierce through her shame." Her lips parted, but no words came. She only nodded, sweat dripping from her jawline, and in that moment she knew she had been given something more valuable than approval. She had been seen. The rest of the day unfolded like a blur. The drills continued, each more punishing than the last, and Claire stumbled, failed, and faltered again and again. But each time, when she thought her body would collapse, she heard the captain's voice in her memory, "Move forward, don't stop." The order was simple, but its echo gave her something she had never had before, direction. By dusk, when the recruits finally assembled for debriefing, she was battered, bruised, and drenched in sweat, but she stood upright. She didn't slouch, didn't shrink into the background. For the first time, she stood shoulder to shoulder with the others, and though her performance was far from stellar, She knew she had earned her place there, if only barely. That night in the barracks, as the others drifted into sleep, Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her body aching in every joint. She replayed the day over and over, the sound of gunfire, the sting of failure, the sharp edge of her own fear. And then, like a steady heartbeat, the captain's command pulsed through her again. Move forward. She whispered it to herself over and over, until the words blurred with her breath. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't salvation. But it was a beginning. For the first time since stepping into this world, she believed she might still belong. The morning after the grueling drills, Claire woke with her body screaming in protest. Every muscle ached, her arms felt like lead, and even breathing sent sharp twinges through her ribs. She rolled onto her side in the barracks, suppressing a groan so as not to wake the other recruits. For a moment, doubt tried to seep back in, whispering that she couldn't endure another day like the last. But the memory of Captain Hayes's voice cut through the fog of weakness. Move forward. Don't stop. Those words weren't just commands anymore, they were lifelines. She forced herself upright, laced her boots with trembling fingers, and joined the others outside as dawn broke across the base. Warm-up drills began, and though every motion stabbed like knives through her sore muscles, Claire gritted her teeth and refused to fall behind. She wasn't the fastest nor the strongest, but she was present and she was pushing. Some recruits gave her sidelong looks, perhaps waiting for her to crumble again, but she ignored them. When they dropped for push-ups, she shook violently after 10, but instead of quitting at 15 as she always had, she clawed her way to 20. Sweat dripped onto the dirt beneath her face, her arms tremored as if they might snap, but she hit the count and collapsed only after the instructor's whistle released them. She wasn't winning anyone's admiration yet, but she was silencing her own excuses, and that was the first real battle. Later, during tactical drills, Captain Hayes appeared again, watching from the sidelines with arms folded. His presence prickled across the field like electricity, pushing every recruit to sharper focus. When Claire's squad prepared for another live simulation, Hayes spoke up, his voice cutting across the chatter. Donovan, front. The air seemed to thicken as every head turned toward her. Her stomach tightened, but she stepped forward, rifle in hand, boots heavy. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a new order. Your point today. Gasps rippled through the squad. The point position was the most dangerous, leading the advance, the first to face fire, the first to die if mistakes were made. Some recruits muttered under their breath, disbelief edging toward resentment. Claire's pulse hammered in her ears, but she swallowed hard and nodded. Hayes's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes, an unspoken challenge as if daring her to prove she could survive it. The whistle shrieked. Chaos erupted. Claire surged forward, every instinct screaming to dive for cover, but she forced her body to obey. Her eyes scanned corners, her rifle moved in jittery sweeps, and though her steps weren't smooth, they were committed. The enemy targets sprang up, gunfire simulations blasting, and she ducked instinctively, firing back. Her aim was shaky, but she hit one, then another, and every small victory fed her momentum. Behind her, Moreno and the others moved in rhythm with her lead, surprised to find her not collapsing under the pressure. Twice she nearly froze, pinned by incoming fire, but each time Hayes's voice echoed in her skull like thunder. Move forward. She pushed and her squad followed. When the final whistle sounded, signaling the end of the drill, Claire collapsed onto one knee, chest heaving, hands trembling on her rifle. She had been marked killed midway through, but not before leading her squad through half the course with surprising cohesion. It wasn't a triumph, but it wasn't failure either. It was progress. After dismissing the squad, Hayes motioned for her to stay behind. The others dispersed, some glancing back with curiosity, others with skepticism. Claire stood rigid, sweat dripping down her temple, her uniform plastered to her body. Hayes approached. Slowly, his boots crunching against the dirt. His voice was calm, low, but carried weight like steel. Do you know why I put you on point? She hesitated, searching for the right answer. To see if I'd break, she said finally. His eyes narrowed. Wrong. To see if you'd move. You can fail every shot, stumble every step, but if you move, the squad moves with you. A leader isn't perfect. A leader doesn't freeze. His words struck deep, deeper than she expected. For months she had thought of herself as the weak link, dragging others down. Now, for the first time, someone was telling her she could pull others forward. She nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight. That evening, Hayes ordered her to report to the training yard after dinner. Alone. The recruits buzzed with speculation, some smirking, convinced she was about to be dismissed, others curious what punishment awaited her. Claire, nerves frayed, almost expected the same. But when she arrived, the captain was waiting with a weighted rucksack and a stopwatch. He pointed toward the far stretch of the running track. 10 laps. Don't stop. I don't care how slow. She swallowed hard, strapped the rucksack onto her back and began. The first 2 laps nearly destroyed her. Her legs screamed, her lungs burned, her shoulders ached from the weight digging into her skin. She stumbled, gasped, and almost collapsed. But each time her body begged for release, Hayes' steady voice cut across the darkening track. Forward. Keep moving. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply demanded. By the 5th lap she was staggering, barely lifting her feet, tears mixing with sweat, but she refused to stop. By the 8th lap her vision blurred, her body moving on willpower alone. When she finally staggered across the line of the 10th lap, collapsing to the dirt, Hayes checked the stopwatch, then crouched beside her. His expression was unreadable, but his words were clear. You can be shaped. That's all I need. Claire lay on the ground, chest heaving, staring up at the star-pricked sky. For the first time since her arrival, she felt something more than exhaustion and shame. She felt possibility. And that possibility, fragile but alive, filled her with a fire she had never known before. The next morning began the same way as always, with the recruits assembled at dawn, but Claire's body carried the weight of the late-night rucksack run like an anchor. Her legs were stiff, her shoulders still bruised where the straps had dug into her skin, and her eyelids felt heavy from lack of sleep. Yet when the whistle blew for the first set of drills, she didn't hesitate. Every repetition hurt, every push-up shook her to the core, but she remembered the captain's words from the night before. You can be shaped. That single phrase fueled her more than any rest ever could. When the obstacle course came, she fought for every inch, clawing, stumbling, bleeding, but never once stopping. The squad began to notice. There were no cheers, no pats on the back, but the silence that usually followed her failures was replaced with quiet acknowledgement. Moreno even muttered as they jogged back to formation, "Not bad, Donovan." It was faint, almost grudging, but it meant more than she could express. That afternoon, Captain Hayes called her aside again. She braced herself, still uncertain if she was being tested or prepared for dismissal. Instead, he led her to a small training ring behind the main field, where mats covered the ground and a few wooden dummies stood in rows. He tossed her a pair of training gloves. "Combat readiness isn't just running and shooting," he said, his tone clipped but firm. "It's about instinct. You freeze, you die. You hesitate, your team dies. So today you fight." Claire stared at the gloves, her pulse quickening. She had sparred before, but her performance had always been miserable. Slow reactions, sloppy footwork, easily overpowered. Hayes stepped onto the mat, squared his stance, and gestured for her to join. "You'll fight me." Her breath caught. "Sir, no excuses," he cut in. "Forward." The word echoed again, and just like the drills, she obeyed. The first exchange was brutal. She swung clumsily, her strike telegraphed a mile away, and Hayes caught her wrist with effortless precision, twisting her arm and sending her sprawling onto the mat. She gasped as pain shot through her shoulder, but before she could recover, his voice snapped, "Up." Again. She scrambled to her feet, fists trembling, and lunged. Another strike, another counter, and again she was on the ground, winded, humiliated. Over and over it happened. She attacked, he dismantled her, sometimes with a strike, sometimes with a hold that left her gasping. Each time she wanted to stop, each time her body screamed in pain, he barked the same command, "Up." Forward. Minutes blurred into an hour, sweat soaking her uniform, bruises forming on her arms and ribs, her body screaming with exhaustion. She thought she might break, but still she rose. Not because she thought she could win, but because she refused to quit. Finally, when her legs wobbled beneath her and her arms hung limp, Hayes stepped back. "Good," he said simply, voice flat but approving. "You lost every round, but you stood up every time. That's the foundation." Claire collapsed to her knees, panting, her chest burning with both pain and a strange exhilaration. For the first time she realized she didn't have to be perfect to be strong. Strength wasn't in winning every fight. It was in refusing to stay down. Hayes extended a hand, and though she hesitated, she took it, letting him pull her back onto her feet. His grip was iron, steady, a silent message that he wasn't done with her yet. The next several days followed the same pattern. Standard drills with the squad in the morning, punishing one-on-one sessions with Hayes in the afternoons. He didn't coddle her. He didn't let her win. He broke her down again and again, forcing her to confront her limits and then push beyond them. When she faltered, he reminded her, "Forward." When she froze, he barked, "Move." Slowly, painfully she began to change. Her footwork sharpened. Her reactions quickened. She still lost most exchanges, but sometimes she landed a hit, sometimes she slipped free of a hold, and each small victory lit a fire inside her. The squad began to notice that change too. During combat drills she no longer dragged them down. Her shots grew steadier, her movements less hesitant. She was far from flawless, but she was no longer the weak link everyone pitied or scorned. One evening, after another grueling sparring session, Hayes tossed her a bottle of water and studied her as she sat slumped against the wall, drenched in sweat. "Do you know why I keep breaking you?" he asked suddenly. She shook her head, too breathless to answer. "Because combat will break you," he said. "Not once. Not twice. Every damn time you step onto the field, it'll hit harder than you expect. If you can't learn to rise from the mat, you won't rise when bullets are flying. But you're learning. Slowly. And that means you're dangerous to anyone who underestimates you." His words sank deep, heavier than any bruise, but also brighter than any praise she'd ever received. She sipped the water, her hands trembling, and whispered, "Thank you, sir." For the first time, he allowed the faintest flicker of a smile to touch his lips before turning away. That night, lying in her bunk, Claire replayed every fall, every bruise, every time she had been slammed into the mat. Instead of shame, she felt pride. Not because she had won, but because she hadn't surrendered. For the first time since arriving at the base, she drifted to sleep not dreading the morning but hungering for it. She wanted to see how far she could go, how much further she could push. The captain's orders still pulsed in her mind, a rhythm she couldn't escape. Forward. Always forward. And now, she believed she could follow it all the way to by the end of the week. Claire's body carried an entire map of bruises and aches, but her movements no longer felt like a burden. She was still slower than the best of the squad, still not as precise with her shots, but something fundamental had shifted. She no longer froze. She no longer hesitated. Every step, every decision, even the mistakes, moved forward. The squad noticed. Whispers of doubt that had once surrounded her gave way to cautious observation. Some still didn't trust her, but others, Moreno especially, had begun to see that she wasn't dead weight anymore. That fragile respect would be tested the next morning, when Captain Hayes announced a full-scale squad evaluation. The recruits stood in formation as he laid out the details. The scenario would simulate a rescue operation, infiltrating enemy-held ground, neutralizing threats, and extracting a hostage target. The simulation was known for breaking recruits apart, exposing weak links, and Hayes made it clear that no one was exempt from scrutiny. "Failure here means you don't belong in this unit," he said, his voice like iron cutting through the morning air. Claire's stomach twisted, but she locked her eyes forward. This was it. The others glanced at her with doubt, some openly skeptical, some silently bracing for her collapse, but she refused to let their expectations dictate her path. When the whistle blew, the squad launched into motion, rifles raised, boots hammering the dirt as they pushed through the mock battlefield. Claire had been assigned middle formation, a position that required steady awareness and adaptability. The first targets popped up and she aimed, fired, and struck too cleanly before ducking into cover. The squad moved like a fluid machine, communication sharp and efficient. For a time, Claire held her own, her rifle steady, her movements smoother than ever before. But as the scenario deepened, resistance grew fiercer. Targets emerged from unexpected angles, simulated grenades detonated, and the squad's rhythm threatened to unravel. Claire felt it, the creeping panic at the edges, the temptation to freeze as pressure mounted. She caught herself just as her muscles tensed, remembering the captain's words, and forced herself forward. She rolled from cover, advanced with Moreno, and laid down suppressive fire. Her shots weren't perfect, but they bought precious seconds for the squad to advance. Moreno shouted for her to move left, and she obeyed without hesitation, covering his flank. For the first time she wasn't dragging him along, they were working side by side. Halfway through the simulation the squad reached the hostage structure. But as they breached, disaster struck. The point man took a simulated hit, his sensor flashing red, and chaos rippled through the line. For a heartbeat, everything threatened to collapse. The squad hesitating, angles uncovered, the mission dangling on the edge of failure. Claire felt the weight of it pressing against her chest, the old fear clawing to return. She glanced at the captain, standing at the edge of the field, arms folded, his eyes on her. No words, no orders. Just that piercing gaze that demanded she decide. Something snapped inside her. She surged forward, shouting for the squad to cover as she entered the breach. Her rifle barked, dropping 2 targets, her body moving faster than her doubts could catch her. Moreno and the others snapped back into rhythm, rallying behind her lead. They cleared the room, neutralized the threats, and secured the hostage dummy. Claire's chest heaved as she pressed against the wall, rifle raised, waiting for the next wave. The squad looked at her with something different this time, not disbelief, not pity, but shock that she had moved when everything was breaking apart. The extraction phase pushed them harder, the enemy pressure relentless. Claire stumbled, her arms heavy, her legs dragging, but each time she felt herself falter, she remembered the command, forward. She fought, advanced, pulled the squad when it wavered, and by the time they crossed the extraction point, the whistle finally shrieked, ending the simulation. Silence followed. The squad stood drenched in sweat, chests heaving, weapons lowered. Hayes walked across the field, his boots crunching slowly against the dirt. His eyes swept over each recruit before landing on Claire. She braced for his judgment, her heart hammering. Not perfect, he said finally, his voice even. But not failure. He let the words hang in the air, heavy, deliberate. For Claire they felt like a metal heavier than any ribbon. The squad exchanged glances, some still doubtful, others quietly impressed. Moreno gave her the faintest nod, and it was worth more than 1,000 cheers. Claire straightened her back, sweat dripping, exhaustion pressing her down but pride holding her upright. She had not only survived the test, she had changed the outcome. That night, back in the barracks, the whispers shifted. No longer mocking, no longer dismissive. They were about how Donovan had moved, how she had pushed forward when the squad nearly broke. She lay in her bunk, listening, her body aching but her heart steady. For the first time she wasn't just surviving training. She was beginning to belong. And as sleep crept over her, she knew this was only the start. The hardest tests still waited, but now she believed she could face them. The sun dipped low behind the jagged hills, painting the training grounds in hues of gold and crimson. The recruits had just finished another grueling set of endurance drills, and while most collapsed into the dirt, sucking in air like drowning sailors, Aisha remained upright. Sweat drenched her fatigues, her arms trembled, but there was a steadiness in her stance that hadn't been there before. The others noticed it too. Only weeks ago she had been the one gasping, stumbling, and collapsing long before anyone else. Now she stood taller, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, her gaze fixed ahead like a soldier waiting for her next command. It wasn't strength alone that had brought her here, it was the single order the captain had given her that day. Stop fighting yourself. Obey. Those words had transformed something inside her, rewiring her entire approach to the struggle. And tonight, under the blood-red sky, that transformation was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. Captain Reed's whistle cut across the murmuring winds, sharp and commanding. "On your feet, all of you," he barked, his voice carrying like thunder. Even the ones sprawled on the ground scrambled up. Nobody dared hesitate when the captain's tone carried that edge. Tonight isn't about drills. Tonight you'll learn what war tastes like. A murmur of unease spread through the group. Aisha felt her heart stutter but forced her expression to remain neutral. Reed gestured toward the treeline at the far end of the training compound. "Beyond those woods, my men are waiting. They'll hunt you and they won't go easy. Your mission is simple. Infiltrate the camp 2 miles ahead and retrieve the beacon. Fail and you'll crawl back empty-handed. Succeed and maybe, just maybe, you'll prove you're worthy of wearing this uniform." The challenge sent adrenaline surging through every recruit. For weeks they had been hammered with drills, discipline, and pain, but this was different. This was combat in everything but live ammunition. Aisha's chest tightened. The memory of her past failures gnawed at her. The obstacle courses she couldn't finish, the weapons she mishandled, the targets she missed. The others would expect her to drag them down again. She could almost hear their unspoken groans. But beneath that fear there was something stronger now. A new voice inside her whispered, steady and commanding, echoing the captain's words, "Stop fighting yourself. Obey." When the whistle blew again, the recruits launched forward, charging into the forest with a mix of desperation and excitement. Branches clawed at their arms, the ground turned uneven, and the thickening darkness swallowed them whole. Aisha kept her movements sharp, her breathing controlled, following the squad's pace but never overextending. The first ambush came fast. A shadow burst from the brush, one of Reed's seasoned SEALs, tackling the lead recruit to the ground. Chaos erupted. Smoke grenades hissed, filling the air with acrid plumes. Flashlights cut through the haze, blinding and disorienting. Aisha dropped low, instincts guiding her where panic once would have ruled. She rolled behind a fallen log, heart hammering but mind sharp. Through the smoke, she spotted two of her squad mates flailing blindly, easy targets. For a moment, doubt tempted her. Why risk herself for others who doubted her? But the captain's lesson thundered back. Obedience to the mission, not the ego. Without hesitation, she darted forward, grabbing one by the vest and yanking him down into cover. A light beam passed over their heads, missing them by inches. The recruit gaped at her, stunned. Aisha only whispered, "Stay low. Move when I move." For once, someone listened to her instead of dismissing her. As they crawled deeper into the woods, the battle around them roared louder. Every few minutes, another recruit screamed out as they were dragged away by SEAL hunters. The squad that had started with 10 was quickly dwindling. By the time they reached the halfway point, only 4 remained, and somehow, Aisha was one of them. Her body ached, her legs screamed with exhaustion, but her mind was sharper than ever. Every step, every breath was measured. She wasn't fighting against herself anymore. She was flowing with the mission, with the moment. The final stretch was the hardest. The beacon's faint blinking light could be seen on a hilltop clearing, but between them and it stood 3 silhouettes, hardened operators armed with stun rifles and endless experience. The recruits froze, dread tightening their faces. One muttered, "We can't take them." Another shifted as if ready to retreat. Aisha felt the familiar wave of fear rise in her gut, but she didn't let it drown her this time. She knelt low, studying the guards. Their patrol rhythm. Their blind spots. Their habits. For the first time since she joined, her brain wasn't clouded by panic. She saw opportunity. "We can," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. The others turned to her, disbelief plain on their faces. But she didn't waver. 2 distractions, 1 flank. "I'll draw their eyes left. While I move, you go right, stay in shadow. Grab the beacon when they break position." Nobody argued. Something about her tone, her conviction, silenced their doubts. For a moment, she wasn't the weakest recruit anymore. She was their anchor. She moved first, snapping a branch deliberately and rushing into view. Shouts rang out, flashlights blazed her way, rifles raised. But instead of freezing, she obeyed the only command that mattered: keep moving. She ducked behind trees, zigzagged, drew their pursuit further and further. Behind her, in the chaos she had orchestrated, she heard the muffled footsteps of her teammates racing for the beacon. Her chest burned, her lungs felt aflame, but adrenaline pushed her forward. And when she finally hit the dirt, pinned under a soldier's weight, she managed to smile through the struggle. Because in the distance, the sharp flare of the beacon igniting lit the night sky. They had succeeded. When the SEALs dragged the recruits back to the compound, Captain Reed was waiting. His eyes locked on Aisha, reading every detail, the dirt on her face, the bruises on her arms, the spark in her eyes. She braced for criticism, for the scathing words she had known too well. Instead, Reed gave the faintest nod, a gesture so small yet so heavy it sent warmth flooding through her veins. For the first time, Aisha felt she belonged. The final assessment loomed over them like a storm cloud, and every recruit in the camp felt its weight. Weeks of training, pain, sweat, and humiliation had all led to this single test. It wasn't just about fitness, endurance, or following orders. It was about proving who could stay calm when every part of their body screamed to give up. Failure here meant dismissal from the program, no second chances, no excuses. For Elena, it was the day she had been dreading and preparing for all at once. She had failed so many drills before, tripped over simple commands, lagged behind in runs, and lost herself in fear during combat simulations. Yet the captain's single order, the demand that she look past fear and stop doubting herself, had planted a seed inside her that had grown stronger with each day. Now it was time to see if it was enough. The assessment began before dawn. Recruits were jolted awake by the blast of whistles and the roar of instructors calling them to form up. The icy morning air bit into their skin as they scrambled into gear. Today wasn't going to be one task but a gauntlet, a chain of trials designed to break even the strongest. The instructors didn't waste time explaining the details. "Follow orders, keep moving, survive until it's over," one of them barked. That was all they needed to know. The first phase was a brutal endurance march. Weighted packs were strapped to their backs, heavier than anything they had carried before. The recruits were driven across rocky terrain, forced to climb ridges and wade through mud that sucked at their boots with every step. Elena stumbled at first, the weight nearly pushing her to her knees, but she gritted her teeth and remembered the captain's words: "Trust yourself. Stop hesitating." She adjusted her breathing, found her rhythm, and focused only on the next step, then the one after that. Around her, other recruits groaned, some faltered, and a few collapsed altogether. The instructors barked at them, but Elena shut it out. One step, then another, her own quiet mantra. Hours later, when the march ended, the recruits were given no rest. They were immediately thrust into the combat course. Smoke grenades choked the air, explosions rattled the ground, and instructors screamed conflicting orders meant to overwhelm. Obstacles rose before them. Walls to scale, barbed wire to crawl beneath, trenches filled with icy water. Elena remembered how she had once frozen in panic at similar drills, unable to push through. But this time she kept moving, her mind sharpened by the hardships she had already endured. When her arms trembled pulling herself over a wall, she imagined the captain's glare, the weight of his expectation, and she hauled herself up with a raw scream. When the icy water closed over her body, she forced her mind to stay,